Actual recording of what we're doing. I'm Scott Walters, rector here at Calvary.
He swears we've met, but I don't think I've ever met him.
I bet y'all have too.
He told me, he sent me a message like, oh, blah, blah, blah.
What we want to do, though, we are recording a podcast, so, be yourselves, laugh, cry, roll in the aisles, whatever these guys make you do. Unless you're a person whose phone rings during a podcast recording, don't be that person. So go ahead and check your phones, turn the ringers off. We're going to do something for about 45 minutes here, let these guys tell us some of their story. And then at about 7 o'clock, we'll open it up for some questions. So keep track of what makes you curious, what rabbit trail you'd like to follow. And we'll do that about 7 o'clock. So, also, please know that our friends at Novel Bookstore, I think, are at the back. Katie, are you the novel seller? We have someone. Welcome. Novels, fabulous local bookstore here selling books for all kinds of authors that are going to be here during this series. So, welcome. Glad you're here. All right, are we good? Sam? Robin? All right, we're going to give it a go. This is Dialogue. It's a podcast of Calvary Episcopal Church's 102-year-old Lenten Preaching Series recorded live in downtown Memphis. I'm Scott Walters, rector of Calvary Church, and tonight we'll be in conversation with Jericho Brown and Ekundayo Bandele. Glad to have these two with us. Jericho Brown's poems have appeared pretty much everywhere people dream their poems might appear one day. Just about a month ago, in his 100th anniversary edition, The New Yorker published his poem Black Dictionary. I think it mentioned Jesus and Nikki Giovanni, but not in that order necessarily.
That's funny.
He's the recent recipient of a so-called MacArthur Genius Award. Right?
I'm jealous of you, bro.
In 2019, his third collection, The Tradition, won the Pulitzer Prize. So when he's not delivering acceptance speeches, he's directing the creative writing program at Emory University. Did I miss anything?
I think that'll do.
Okay. Ekundayo Bandele preached a beautiful sermon at noon today, so go back and watch it if you didn't have a chance. He's a playwright, an actor, a novelist. He's the founder and CEO of Hattie Lou Theater here in Memphis. Hattie Lou began in a storefront over in the Edge District in 2006, and in 2014 moved into its fabulous home over on South Cooper Street, debt-free with a $500,000 endowment. Stunning. Hattie Lou is the only freestanding black repertory theater in 5 surrounding states, which is an amazing accomplishment and a heartbreaking reality both, right? They've also done things like converted an 8,000 square foot Head Start school into the Hattie Lou Technical Theater Center. They've opened a residential space for guest artists and interns called Hattie House. And Ekundayo was telling me about more projects still to come in an old church. I mean, these folks are not resting on their considerable laurels. So this is an amazing Memphis institution. Grateful to have both of you two in conversation today. All right, so my first question is just this. Some Episcopalians in Memphis said, you want to come preach in our pulpit, and both of you said yes. Why would you say yes to something like that?
Well, beauty before age.
That's really bad because I think we're the same age. Anyway, no, I'll just, I don't see why I wouldn't. So it seems to me a question, who wouldn't?
Most of the world.
Would not. I think people feel like they generally, I know I do, I have things I'd like to say that I would like to impart, and I'm happy to hear what other people like to say that they have to impart. I'm a poet, and a poet is a truth teller, and some say the original translation of the word prophet is truth teller, right? So I imagine myself as a person working. I think of myself as a person doing spiritual work when I'm writing my poems, and because that is happening when I'm writing my poems, when I move through the world, I become the conveyor of that spiritual work. Whether somebody asks me to give a reading of poetry or anything to do with the word. I understand writing I didn't understand. Really, maybe in the last very few years, somewhere in my 40s, I began to understand just how special it was to be able to write, how much of a gift it was. The reason why my cousin Diane is here and she knows this feeling. There's a person that in your family gets called on when it's time to make an obituary or when it's time to say something at a wedding. And it's because everybody knows that you're the scribe, you're the person meant for that. And so when people ask me to do something that takes some writing, I consider it, and I generally say yes if I can, and I could. And I'm always happy to talk to people I know who are believers. So that seems, but maybe that's special, but I don't know if, you know what I mean?
But I love that there's a very communal aspect. Some people may have an idea of the poet as the solitary. You don't present as this shrinking violet that likes to get away from the world and just go off. But there is a sense that there is a solitary experience, but everything you're talking about is how this gets drawn out in conversation with the broader community is what I'm hearing you say. That you're energized by being asked to say this on behalf of the family or in the pulpit. Is that right?
And I just want to live my life the way I would like to be remembered. I don't think a lot about my death, but I will die. And when I die, that last day, for a second at least, I'll be thinking, well, I never did this or I never did that. Do you know what I mean? And I would rather be thinking, oh, I did this and I did that. Do you know what I'm saying? And I don't want anything in the world to stop me from having the experiences I would want to have. And I love talking to people about poetry. I love revealing to people how much they love poetry, although they didn't know that they loved it. And I find myself in positions where that's really my duty, that's my job, that's part of my calling, So.
Ekundayo, why'd you say yes?
Well, so it's a double thing. So why I said yes to tonight is one of the ways that I balance my life is that I read fiction and I do audiobooks for nonfiction. And the audiobook that I'm listening to right now is Paul Laurence Dunbar, who's an incredible poet. And so when I saw that I was going to be able to sit next to this poet and have a conversation with this poet, and then Paul Laurence Dunbar really breaking down the power of poetry, how could I not accept the invitation but to sit next to this poet? So that is within this moment. Yep. And earlier with speaking from your pulpit, I see creation like a necklace of wooden beads, right? And you have that filament, that string that goes through those wooden beads. And that string is in Ifa what we call ashe, or it is this spirit. And the beads are Episcopalian, Yoruba, Buddhist, Islamic, and what have you. But we're all connected with that string. And so if you are speaking through that string, it doesn't matter if you're speaking from a pulpit, or if you're speaking from a street corner, or if you're speaking from the rostrum of a spoken word place in some dingy coffee shop. So how not say yes to be able to use that string to communicate what comes or emanates from you as an individual in this time and in this space.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of this time and this space, it becomes all the more necessary that we be there to encourage one another in a moment where, for lack of a better word, religion has been weaponized. Period.
And language has.
Yeah, and language has been weaponized, period. And religion and language don't have to be weapons. It's until you want to cause a war When you want to start a war, you turn those things into weapons, but they don't need to be weapons. So, I mean, if anything, I think of myself as a person who's here to tell everyone in the reach of my voice that you are not crazy. you are right in the way that you believe. Do y'all understand what I mean? Like, you didn't think about hurting anybody today, and you still love God. Because I do think there's a way that condemnation has become associated with religion, Christianity, but many other religions too, it seems.
Facebook?
Condemnation.
It's condemnation.
Yeah. And so you sort of need, I feel that I need reminders all the time from people just letting me know, actually you're on the right track, and you're doing the making, the creating. Yeah. That is literally what the Bible says. The Bible says we're made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. And what does God do? He made everything, makes everything. Therefore, we are here to make our lives, to create our lives every day. You know, and you can sort of, obviously I can make metaphor out of this with poetry because I have proof of it in a poem, right? Somehow or another, I get a series of sentences and words, and then I make this thing. You read it and feel moved by it. Hopefully you even cry or laugh or, call somebody you love that you hadn't called in a long time and tell them you want to see them. Do you know what I mean? Like you're moved to feeling, and I hope, I pray, then to action. Do you know what I'm saying?
And both of you, what's interesting to me, sometimes an artist wants to pull back and say, I'm not going to tell you this means something. There's this distance.
Yeah.
You've talked about the theater being a place of education, not entertainment. And you're being really upfront to say, I want my poems to change people, move people, stir people.
I'm not going to tell you what a poem means.
Yeah.
But I will tell you what a poem can do. Yeah. And I do, why else would I be out here? Do you know what I'm saying? I expect my poems and I expect the poems I read by other people. I also expect this from other forms of art. When I see a movie, when I see a film, when I'm watching a television show, when I'm reading a novel, when I am looking at visual art, my expectation is that it allows me interaction with it. And that interaction leads to my involvement such that I am moved. And if you are indeed moved to feeling, you will be moved to thought. And if you are moved to thought, you will be moved to action. And I don't get into the other parts. I let you do that. But I can do the first part, which is making something that moves you, making something that puts you in a position where you consider, where you reconsider.
Yeah. And piggybacking what Jericho just said is creating something and then allowing you to translate it, right? And so I don't necessarily think it's distance. I think it's artistic freedom for the audience to be able to read or view something and then mine out of that what is relevant to them. And I believe when you have a great artist who is able to create a tapestry from which many people can pull their interpretation, then I do believe that is the manifestation of God as creator.
Right, exactly. That's perfect. That's it.
And it's another way of, in religion, it's another way of approaching holy texts. If we think the truth is way upstream in the head of somebody way back when, and I got to get back through history, or is the Spirit moving when that story intersects with mine today? And I could imagine that in theater, there's this temporal, it's risky, it's happening in real time. In poetry, you're trusting the reader to let it do what it will do. Even after you've spent so much work being so meticulous about getting down what you want to.
I can say, listening now, like I said, to Paul Laurence Dunbar, I've developed a new appreciation for poetry. My favorite poet, of course, was Pablo Neruda, and then I got into Rita Dove. And what I'm finding, I read your piece in the New Yorker that Scott sent me, And the beauty of poetry is the amount of weight that is given to each individual word. You have a novel, which can be 300-400 pages.
Ooh,
and you have a poem that can be 10 lines. And so you have to be so intentional about every single word, about where does this sentence leave off and this stanza picks up. And so that is something that and again, why I was honored to be here. Y'all not going to hear a lot from me because I'm going to be listening just like y'all, right? But no, but that is the artistry and the consistency of creation, right? It isn't that God created, God is creating all the time. Right now, an infant somewhere is taking its first breath. That is God in the activity of creating. And it is when we look back and say, oh, this was a singular moment of creation. There is no such thing as creation. There is creating because it is an activity.
Always, yeah.
Wow, it's in the present.
And if you don't believe it, and a really good example of it is listening to people who can talk, who can cook, talk to each other. 'Cause I'm not one of those people. But I used to, when I was a kid growing up, I remember I have this distinct memory of conversations that my aunts and my mom and my cousins would be having about how you get the cake right. Or, I remember, as a matter of fact, I have this very strong memory of my mother. My mother would always, my grandmother would always organize, my grandmother on my father's side would always organize, Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holiday the family was getting together for. And she would call people and she'd say, now you bring in the pecan pies and you bring in the potato salad and she would call people to tell them what to bring based on what she thought they could do. And I remember, and my mother was so proud that her mother-in-law would call her on the phone and say, you could do one pecan pie, Naomi. And then you bring potato salad. Can you please make that potato salad? And I remember, we would be at the event, and my aunts on my father's side again, we would be eating, my mom's potato salad, and they would say, Naomi, what you doing this potato salad? And my mama would say, I don't understand this. I've never understood this answer, but this is what I love about my mom. How'd you make this potato salad? Because I ain't scared.
I'm terrified.
So you can't be scared. Don't be scary like we used to say.
So Jericho, you get asked a lot about form but this is making me think about your. I'm curious about the way we use form in both of your art forms. So in this project, right, we're saying that something powerful can happen in a moment when the composition or the play comes into contact with somebody else's story. It's holy. It's holy. It's fascinating to me that there can also be these additional constraints that we place on ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'd love you to riff on that too. Maybe Jericho, you've got a poem. You've invented some forms in your last book or tweaked some forms or come up, which is interesting to me that it's like, are you just trying to make things harder? Or is there something in the form itself that carries you in it? How does that process go for you and why do you do it? And how does it contribute to what we're talking about here?
Well, form does a few things. One thing that it does is it creates music, and creating music lends to memorization. The way I like to think about memorization is knowing something by heart. And when you know something by heart, then you can recite it and you can use it even when it's not in front of you. So if you're looking at the avocados at the grocery store, you can recite a poem to yourself without even realizing you're doing it as you're looking at avocados or while you're mowing the lawn. You can have a poem that you're dealing with. And what form does is it helps you remember that because form creates a song, rhyme, for instance. As a writer, it's also useful because it pushes you past the language you would regularly use. So for instance, if I know I'm working with a poem that rhymes, and at the end of a line I say the word yellow, when it's time to repeat that sound, I have to come up with a word that rhymes with yellow. And that word might be mellow. Now, mellow isn't a word you've heard people use since 1982. So because I know I have no choice but to use the word, and you do have other choices. I mean, you could say halo, but let's stick with mellow just because I got to say it. I hadn't said it in so long, since 1982. But a word like mellow means that you have to figure out what it is you have to say based on that word. So the intentions you sat down with shift. Now you're working with your subconscious mind. Now you have to figure out, I mean, this is the kind of thing I say in my classroom, and my students are looking at me crazy, but y'all won't look at me crazy. It's just interesting being in this sphere and having this moment. Why would God give me mellow? I haven't used that word in years. And now I've got to find a way to get it in a sentence. And it's got to have something to do with what I said about yellow earlier. And so the word yellow ends up guiding me and leading me toward the next thing I have to say. That's not me. That feels, at least while I'm writing, like it comes from another source. I should read a duplex. Just because you mentioned it, I have one in this bag. This bag that comes from someplace called Lansky's. I never heard of it. Lansky's, baby, they so expensive up in there. Oh my God. Y'all some wealthy people. Here's a poem. I invented a form. The form that Scott is referencing is a form I invented called the duplex. And the duplex is ultimately 3 other forms at the same time, which I can talk about at length tomorrow. And those forms are the hustle, the sonnet, which you've probably heard of, and the blues, which you've also heard of. So I'll read one example of those for you now. Duplex. A poem is a gesture toward home. It makes dark demands I call my own. Memory makes demands darker than my own. My last love drove a burgundy car. My first love drove a burgundy car. He was fast and awful, tall as my father. Steadfast and awful, my tall father hit hard as a hailstorm. He'd leave marks. Light rain hits easy, but leaves its own mark, like the sound of a mother weeping again. Like the sound of my mother weeping again, no sound beating ends where it began. None of the beaten end up how we began. A poem is a gesture toward home.
How much I owe you?
So there's a way that we think about the free verse poem as being the place of the unexpected. But I think of the formal poem as the actual place of the unexpected, because you have no choice but to follow music rather than sense. We were talking about this, sense and sound, right? And when you're following sound, you end up saying things you did not expect to say because they fit the rhythm. Yeah. And if something fits the rhythm, then you later have to figure out, well, then why did I say that? In revision, you're asking yourself what I think of as spiritual questions. What does this mean? I said that. I wrote that. Yeah. Do I believe that? Yeah. And if I believe that, maybe I should start living like it. Do you follow what I mean?
Yes, and that poem, I love that poem. That's one of my favorites. But you can feel it drawing you through itself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'd never thought of it until you described how the structure can actually draw you out of a sense of control over, I'm going to say this thing and I'm going to wrap it in a metaphor and I'm going to pretty it up with a rhyme.
Yes.
You can feel it in that poem, one line moving you into the next couplet, insisting that you go this place you didn't expect. And it's interesting. I'm going to interject this just because as someone who didn't grow up in a liturgical tradition but found myself in one, liturgy can do that in different kinds of churches. I feel like it feels like a structure that would be constraining, and yet I find within that container room for experiences I didn't plan on having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so something in the form is opening up even that. Is there...
Well, yeah, so I'm currently working on a play. It takes me 2 to 3 years to write a play. And whenever I approach a play, I think of William Faulkner's acceptance speech for the Nobel Prize. And his line that resonates with me is, "It is the duty of every writer to treat the human heart in conflict with itself." Mm-hmm. And so I think of that when I approach my work, right? And in theater, you ask yourself two questions when you're looking at a character. What does the character want? And what will happen if they don't get it? Mm-hmm. So the stakes, right? And so the play, you and I talked about this earlier, is called Speak, Salvation Speak, which I started in my theater class at Morehouse. And it is all about speaking in tongues through the Pentecostal tradition, and then speaking in tongues through the Ifa tradition of the Yoruba people in Nigeria, right? And so you have 3 characters. You have Peter from the book of Acts. You have May, which is another name for Mary, who was the only woman in the Bible that spoke in tongues. And then you have Ohun, which means the voice of God in Ede Yoruba. And so I look at archetypes. How do I create people that stand for things that are larger than themselves? Mm-hmm. How can I treat the human heart in conflict with itself? Mm-hmm. What does this character want? And what will happen if they don't get it? Mm-hmm. And so when I approach this, I am looking at a universal question and a universal consequence. Mm-hmm. And so even though here I'm writing about Pentecostalism and I'm writing about Ifa, I am looking at the human heart and the human condition that can go from Palestine to Ukraine to Memphis, Tennessee, and say, how can I treat this? And then if I can really delve down into what does this human heart want, then can I dig down and find out what will happen if it doesn't get it? Mm-hmm. What will happen if Ukraine doesn't get this? What will happen if Israel or Palestine doesn't get this? What will happen if America doesn't get this? And then wrap all of that up into 3 characters. And so when you see the play, it registers to you like you're listening to John Batiste playing Beethoven. If you ain't listened to that album, you need to listen to it. John Batiste playing Beethoven, and you're hearing things on so many registers. You're hearing Beethoven, but then you're also hearing the New Orleans blues. And so everyone in the audience is getting something different, and they are getting their want, and they are also finding their stakes.
Wow. The Pentecostal piece is fascinating to this because it reminds me a little bit of what you're talking about. If there's a genius to Pentecostalism, it's speaking before I know what it means, like trusting something's coming through me, the sound.
But that's what Jericho just said.
Yeah.
He just said that he writes something. He doesn't understand why Mello was given to him, right?
Yeah.
And so this is him speaking in tongues, and then going back in the revision and trying to find out where did that come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating product. Well, what did organize? And I hate to go back to organized religion, but it makes me curious in a way, because we're on this edge of living spirit in the moment. But a lot of people start out in organized religion and are like, I need this. What was your experience with other structures? Other structures. Now we're talking structures again that don't always free people up, but maybe they can. But it's a form, right? For better or for worse. What's that look like in your story? Church, or whatever.
So I grew up AME, which is a structured form of Methodists within the Black community. I won't get into what moved me left of AME, but I will say this. There was a guy I grew up in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and there was a guy named Ron. Ron was a bad brother, and he got back from Rikers. And Ron was clean shaven, he had on a bow tie and blah, 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 blah. He had joined the Nation of Islam. And I had never seen him like that. And I was like, yo, man, what's up? Blah, 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 blah. We're talking. He ends up taking me to the mosque. And I see these black men dressed in suits with bow ties. I'd never seen that. That image, right? So it was that imagery that made me look or turn left from AME. Then next, and I'm going to make this a full quick circle, I left the nation and became Sunni Muslim. And when I was a Sunni Muslim, which they abide by hadiths, unspoken laws that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he followed, that you must follow if you're Sunni, I started growing locks, right? And there was a hadith that said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam combed his hair at least once every 3 days. And if I didn't comb my hair at least once every 3 days, I wasn't Sunni, which meant I wasn't Muslim. And I cursed and threw my kufi down. And I left. And I entered into this wilderness of self-discovery through the Spirit, right? And so to make this thing a full circle, what I learned is that if you look all the way back to Martin Luther, not my Morehouse brother, Martin Luther King Jr., I'm throwing that shout, boom. And we HBCU, so, we always doing that. But if you go back to Martin Luther, who is saying you don't have to know how to read and speak Latin to speak to God, right? You go back to Horus and Osiris, and then you see the Greeks going into ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, and they're stealing it and translating it, right? Religion is evolution, right? In my own life, in the microcosm within the macrocosm of creation, there I was AME, then I became and I joined the nation, then I became Sunni, then I became a Babalosha and Ifa, and now I'm pretty much spiritual. It's an evolution. Yeah. So it's pretty much like Martin Luther to Kojic, right? Yeah. So when you talk, for me, as an individual, when you talk about spirituality, it really comes back to that necklace of, wood beads. It's just a different slang. That's it. That's how I see it, anyway.
He's got a poem about his hair and God.
You had a poem about your hair and God?
Monotheism. Yeah, I do have a poem about it. That is true.
Is it in this book?
It is in this book. Should I read it?
Yeah, you should.
It's okay with me.
I hadn't thought about that poem.
I like that.
Oh, let me see if I can.
I had hair. If y'all were following me at Morehouse, I had all of this hair and I had cornrows.
Pictures.
You saw pictures, right? And then I went to go hear the Glee Club this past Saturday. Mm-hmm. And so I entered Morehouse at 51 years old and lived in a dorm, Mays Hall, right? And so I found myself growing my hair out, and I had cornrows and stuff, and I graduate, and I cut it off. Then I see the brothers at the Glee Club this Saturday. I'm like, man, they influenced me. I had hair, and I ain't got no hair, even though I can grow some hair, but I ain't got no hair. I know, right? Wow. Exactly, that's a poem. Write it down. Copyright. Morehouse hair.
I'm going to read it, because then maybe I will have answered the question. I just hadn't looked at it in a long time. Wow, this book sure does have a lot of poems in it.
I've read all of them.
Monotheism. Some people need religion. Me, I've got my long black hair. I twist the roots and braid it tight. You're my villain. You're a hard father. From behind it winds, tied and tucked, untouchable. Then comes the night. Before I carry my mane to bed with me, I sit us in front of the vanity. Undo, unwind. Finally, your fingers, it says, near my ear. Your fingers, your whole hands, no one's but yours. That's it.
Amen.
Feels like a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about religion, but maybe ritual. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really do this to my hair.
You don't?
I don't do much of nothing to my hair. Everything that happens to my hair happens because I sit in somebody's chair. and I sit there for however many hours it takes. And then one day they set me free and charge me for sitting there. But I don't do a bunch to my hair. You know, but hair is very obviously.
You started big in that poem. Monotheism.
Yeah.
Religion. Some people need religion.
Yeah, I think the end of that poem is a little bit about loneliness too. It seems to me, you know, it's like I have my hair, I have my oneness, I have myself, but then that self also means you are alone. I carry my mane and not my man to bed with me. Do you know what I mean? But I think just something that I've noticed in this poem that reaches, when I read this poem, I think about everything I've seen Black people doing to their hair and how there are certain rituals and things you just have to go through in order to, you know, I remember there was a time where, you know, before you went to bed, women would put curlers in their hair and then they would, I mean, maybe they still do, some of them, right? And wake up and you'd have to take and it's just a lot of work. And even for men, you know, you see, when I was a kid growing up, getting haircuts, it meant, you know, however often you just sit there and you listen to a bunch of like other grown men tell a lot of lies. And if you ever want to hear lies, just go sit in a barbershop on any Saturday. You know, maybe not as much because things are much more by appointment now, it seems to me. But it used to be, you know,
sitting in the chairs all
yeah, you would just sit there and you sort of would learn that people were crazy. And it was really good training in like, you know, how ridiculous people can be. And so there's a lot of that, I think, in the poem, just the ritual of hair. But it also makes me think about something that's always been in my mind. I've been thinking about this and trying to figure out how to deal with it in poems. You know, poems are always about these little moments and trying to catch the moments. I was talking to you about this, like, how do you catch a moment or catch a thought and pin it down into words? But there's this television show, which originally comes from a series of books. And some of you might be familiar. Sometimes I feel like I've gotten to be 1,000 years old, but it was called Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, Lord. Oh, my God.
And if you watch Little House on the Prairie, it must have been on for like 49 seasons. Because I mean, and I remember, I guess by the time I was watching it was in reruns. I don't know, was it on? I don't know. But I just remember watching episodes and you would literally see child actors grow up to the point where they would become adult actors who had kids. And you would see people who were like, these are my kids, become grandparents on the same show. It was so stressful.
Nothing computer generated.
Yeah, it was real. Like, yes, it was so strange, you know? And I remember in that show, one of the things I remember about that show is that all of the women in that show would have their hair up throughout the day, and then at night, they would take their hair down and they would brush their hair. And they all had this unexpected, do y'all remember this unexpected hair? Yeah. It would always be like, wow, she sure does have a lot of hair. Michael Landon would be like sitting on the corner of the bed looking at his wife, take her hair down. Michael Landon would be like, take her hair down. And she'd be looking in the mirror like, brushing the hair out of her. Do y'all remember that? Young people, we were born in the best time. Young people don't even have nothing like that no more. Sometimes I get so sad about that. I just pray for them. God bless. I really do. This is very serious to me. You know, can you imagine growing up in a generation where you don't get to slow dance? Like, what? You know, when young people are slow dancing or even listening or enjoying slow dance, you know, and maybe this is, maybe y'all know this differently. Maybe some of you know this differently, you know, culturally. But I always wonder, like, you know, you don't get to, like, go up to, like, somebody at a high school dance and be like, yo. You don't get to find a way to make it happen. Do y'all know what I mean? Like, you don't get to experience, like, that piece of sensuality that you get to experience that still has innocence involved with it.
Embodied in real time.
Yeah, isn't that something? Like, I notice when young people, like, you can sort of see this if you pay attention to certain platforms like TikTok. When young people are enjoying songs that are down tempo, they're usually mid tempo. I mean, it's like, you know, Can We Talk by Tevin Campbell. Do y'all know how old that song is? Or something older. Do y'all know what I mean? But they don't have new slow songs.
Right.
Like, what are you making love to? But there are, if you look, there are certain playlists where you can hear the slow songs, but then they don't have those slow songs. There are slow songs. I found them. I was worried about this. But they don't have them in common. We have songs, like if I say Stephanie Mills, people know who I'm talking about. Some of the people in this audience are just like, you actually just know what that voice sounds like. Do y'all know what I mean?
Oh, well.
But there's a way that, like, I don't know how we're talking about this, excuse me, but that music sort of gets split up and siloed such that you never have to listen to what you don't like. And so you never have to figure out what you might like. This is my problem also with online dating. In online dating, you go in when you're dating online. I have a therapist and she encourages me. No, she encourages. I never wanted to date on. I thought it was really ridiculous. I'm sorry. You can go online, and if you don't want to meet or see or be seen by anybody under 5'8", you can literally just make that happen. And nobody under 5'8" will see you. And you will never see, it's like this whole world where people under 5'8" don't exist. And why is that a problem? That's a problem because somebody under 5'8" might have made you laugh. And you would have forgot that they were 5'8" because they made you laugh. Do you know what I mean? I worry about stuff. Y'all don't worry about that. That keeps me up at night.
Even the people out on the prairie saw somebody young.
Yeah. And you think, y'all know what I mean? Like you think you like something. You think, it's okay for you to have a thought like, oh, this is what I like. But then in certain situations, you meet a person and they do something else enough that you forget that they don't have this or that thing that you thought you liked. Do you know what I mean?
Or it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I'm interested in these things because I'm interested in what are the grounds from which love grows, right? And how do you know it's love? And one of the ways you know something is love is that you forget what you don't like, or you figure out that you like something you didn't know you could like. Do you know what I mean? And that's sort of what I'm interested in my work, that it always brings up the surprise of what you like.
It's
and form,
the same thing
we were talking about form.
About,
and the order of service is this way, particularly in black churches. You don't know. You go to a black church and they actually give you a program. They used to, maybe they don't anymore, but they give you a program and it says what's going to happen.
They give you a QR code.
Yeah, they give you a QR code. They give you a QR code on Zoom. And it says what's going to happen, But so I knew everything that was going to happen in church every Sunday. There were no surprises, except each thing was different. Like knowing the sermon, which was like one of the lines on the order of service, didn't mean I knew exactly when people were going to shout, or how hard, or whether or how long he was going to take to deliver it, or where that scripture was going to come from. I found that out when I got there Sunday. If it says selection 1, it says selection A and B by the choir, do you know what I mean? I didn't know what they were going to sing, or if it was going to include a soloist and who was going to be the soloist. And I think I'm just interested in, form as it relates to the way you create surprise. That's what form does. When you have a system, when you have a pattern, then surprise means more. That's why in the second verse of a song, people start ad-libbing and they start doing runs because they've lined it out. This is the melody of the song. I gave you that in the first verse. And in the second verse, I'm going to mess with it so you can know I can sing. Do you follow what I'm saying?
It's the same thing. Yeah. The surprise, you're reminding me that the algorithms keep us from being surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
They head surprise off the pass because they only deliver, or some substitute. There's something that makes me feel like it scratched the itch that needs to be surprised.
Yeah,
but it's not real novelty or real difference or real challenge or real something, what you're describing.
It's dumb too,
It is dumb.
You buy a light bulb on Amazon, God rest her soul. You buy a light bulb on Amazon and suddenly Amazon wants to sell you 900 light bulbs. Like, girl, I didn't need but one light bulb. I only have so many light bulbs in there's so many light fixtures in my home. Do you know what I mean? It seems like if I buy a light bulb, you ought to show me something that has something to do with a light bulb.
Yeah.
Do you
don't even have to do that. You just have to speak it close to your phone.
Oh my God, it's embarrassing.
That's scary.
You feel like you're being haunted.
And that's the
Okay,
truth.
now that we've...
And it's really bad if you're a person who believes in something like the law of attraction, because then you don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you believe that you have a vibration in this world and that vibration is drawing to you what you believe and what you think about most. Do y'all know if you're a person who believes that, right? Then you have to wonder is this my vibration? Or is this just theory? You know what I mean? It's unfair.
Now you're distrusting yourself.
Yeah.
Your essence.
Sorry.
Wait, we're Little House on the Prairie to online day. Okay, I'm here.
It's a podcast.
But it's real. But this is helpful. Okay, we started by both of you saying, I think this was while we were in this conversation, not before, that your art matters to real human lives. You want your art to matter. So here we've arrived at one description of our modern situation. How does what you do help us engage this disconnected, disembodied, algorithmic sorting? Does it participate in something? Is there a way that the theater can help snap me out of the maws of that or something, or seduce me, or...
I was teaching theater management in Khartoum, Sudan. And this was back in like 2015. And I had a driver, and the driver would always take me, from the hotel to the university and on the run and all the way around and blah, blah, blah. And there were all of these outdoor malls, but they were just vendors, right? And at every last one, you had an old brother sitting, squatting. You had people around him. And he was the only one that didn't have meat or cloth or kufis or Qurans or anything like that. And after maybe a week or so, I asked my driver, I was like, that dude, every last one I go to, that guy, and there are people sitting around him. I was like, what the heck is he doing? And he was telling stories. And the people were sitting around, they were paying him to hear him tell those stories, right? At Hattiloo, we just did this thing called the Black History Symposium. And some people might have thought that it was mission creep because we had someone talking about gentrification, someone talking about acculturation and blah, 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 blah. But the way that they were talking about it, they were telling stories. They were saying, this happened to me at this time. This happened to me at this time, and so on and so forth. So what Hattiloo is doing is bringing about the griot. The art of ancient storytelling. How do we relate to one? Everything we just talked about is stories. He just talked about Little House on the Prairie, talked about being in a barber shop, talked about all of these things, stories. Everything I've been talking about, Fort Greene, Morehouse, stories. And so what I'm curating through Hattiloo and what I'm attempting to do with individuals is for them to understand that they have a story. Just like his grandma in the kitchen, saying you can bring one pecan pie, but you can bring as much, chicken salad or whatever that you want to bring. That's a story. And what is the relevance and what is the value of your story? Because even the poorest person on the street got a story. And if they understand that someone wants to listen to it and that someone can be touched by it, then all of a sudden that person who feels like they have no value, they're the richest person out on their street at that moment. And so that is where my focus goes, not just entertainment, especially given that Hattiloo is reaching its 20-year anniversary and we're going to make an elevation of our mission statement. It's all about the power of stories, sitting around that guy in Khartoum, Sudan and paying him just to listen.
Yeah. What does it say about the culture that says that's worth being paid for?
Exactly.
We live by.
But we do that.
We do.
Look.
We do.
Someone purchased this. They value the story. Someone comes to Hattie and buys a ticket. They value the story. Someone buys Sting's new album. They value the story. Someone goes on YouTube and they watch something. They value the story. We value it. We just don't understand the definition of value. We understand the definition of consumerism. But do we understand what we actually value? And that may be becoming an antiquated notion and an antiquated definition to our children. They come up and they say, I like it, but do they understand that the synonym of like is sometimes value? Dang, that was deep. I just came up with that because I'm sitting next to greatness.
Anybody else need to be anyplace else tonight? We can go 2 more hours.
Well, seeing where your money goes definitely shows you, seeing where anybody's money goes definitely shows where their values really are, right? I think that we are, there's sort of, it's almost like there's, I feel this way as an artist, that there's this sort of inside world and this outside world. And the outside world, the world that I sort of lived in before I became an artist, and I do feel this way, that things are sort of set up such that you, at any cost, can avoid vulnerability and intimacy. Vulnerability and intimacy seem like the worst ideas. Every billboard says it, every television show says it, every reality show says it. Do you know what I mean? And part of the reason all of those things say it is because they know that with vulnerability and intimacy come, with those things come risk. And the risk is heartbreak, which is the worst feeling. Do you know what I mean? It's the worst. And you can have heartbreak not just in the romantic love situation. You can have heartbreak in your relationship with your nation. As a citizen, you can have heartbreak within your family. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I feel like, go ahead.
And I just think that the work of art, the work of poetry, the work of plays, and people's fear of poetry has to do with a sort of built-in, sort of inherent understanding that is where I go get my vulnerability and my intimacy, or that is the thing that will make me more vulnerable and more interested in intimacy. Everybody wants to fall in love, but you don't get to fall in love if you are not vulnerable. And yet people are like, oh, don't be vulnerable. Like your parents, your brother and your sister, the things you tell your children, do y'all know what I mean? Whatever you do, be safe in every way, even if that means never talking to people. Do you know what I mean? I mean, even in the South, like I really do think this is, less and less in the South. I see people just saying hello to each other as they walk by each other. And it's sort of weird. And
if you got earbuds in, you got
Yeah. And I think part of that is the thing, though. It's make sure you are siloed. And if you are siloed enough, you don't have to take responsibility for anything that goes on outside of yourself.
So something that I think your poems do powerfully, and I think theater does too, and we're over time, and I'm sorry, but I'm still going to ask this question. Is that you're truthful about love and vulnerability and brutality in the same line, in the same poem. Part of what you're describing here, it does feel like maybe sometimes the stage can do this too. Are they places where we can go and realize that vulnerability means vulnerability to harm and love? And it's not safe, but this is a safe place to actually go explore that, so that maybe in real life we could be a little more fully alive with each other. Is that something that is that real? It feels like it to me.
Yeah.
I've gotten that from your poems. I don't know if you put them in there.
I just I am happy to live in a world where my so-called negative experiences are of use to me, and lead to positive and affirming experiences. I am happy. I really am, y'all. I am happy to have experiences that give me clarity about what I want and what I don't want, who I am and what I need and how I survive and how I thrive. And sometimes, and you just can't get clarity thinking you already know everything and only having good things happen to you. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? So I think the real life experience and the real growth has to do with loving and accepting every part of yourself. Like, that's my goal. I mean, that's what I love about being a poet, that my poems put me in a position where when something comes down and it wants to come in the page, I have to deal with it. Even if it's something I thought I didn't like about myself. It's an opportunity for me to show compassion for myself. And if you're not showing, one way to know that you're not showing compassion for yourself is you have very little compassion for other people. You have very little empathy for other people. And I figured this out as a teacher. When I started teaching, I was hard on my students. And I still am in many ways. But there are some things where I'm like, you're acting like that, Jericho, because you're afraid of that. Because you would talk to yourself bad in the mirror if you did that. Do you understand what I mean? And sooner or later, you have to forgive yourself. You know what I mean? You have to accept that, like, part of what we're doing includes the making of mistakes. The reason why I'm dealing with this, there was recently a death in my community back home in Atlanta, and they couldn't find, there were this couple, they were getting married, they were getting married day after tomorrow, and they both died. And it's very sad, but they found the woman's body but couldn't find the man's body. And because they couldn't find the man's body, everybody was like, well, what did he do to her? And of course, his parents were feeling a certain kind of way about that and then they found his body, and the mother, she said, I don't care what would have happened. I never wanted them to find that body. I would rather my son be alive than anything, because even if my son made whatever kind of mistake in the world, he could always correct that mistake. He could always have a change of mind. He could always learn. He could always be better than whatever he was the day before. Do you know what I'm saying? And I have that wish for myself. And I think if we have that wish for ourselves, we can begin to have a different kind of value for life and have that wish for other people. That belief in a kind of growth no matter what the experience.
Yeah, that's resurrection.
Yes. That's what I'm preaching about tomorrow.
That's resurrection, okay.
Yeah.
I promised they could ask a question. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you both for this.
Y'all got it hot in here.
Let's ask some